Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So finally, I am finally able to film our Boys in the Valley review. This book was one of my most anticipated reads of not only 2023, but when I heard about it in 2022, I was also super excited. This is a novel by Fracassi. This book actually came out several years ago. Let's find out exactly when. I think 2021. Yes, it originally came out in 2021 and was released in a very small batch. But was so well received that Toward Nightfire decided to pick it up for 2023 and give it a more universal release. I did a buddy read on this with my good friend Blackacre Doe. We actually recently read Philip Fracassi's other novel that was released this year, Gothic. So we have a whole buddy read, like double video on that as well. I'll have all of Blackacre's info linked down below. If for some reason you're on this channel and have not heard about my buddy reads with Blackacre, he's a very, very good friend of mine. He does indie horror book reviews as well as metal tutorials. He's an amazing, amazing guitar player. So if you're into that, definitely check out his channel. He's awesome, super rad, and we tend to have a lot of similar opinions on books, so it's really fun to do buddy reads. However, we have recently determined that Philip Fracassi is maybe not an author for him and maybe more of an author for me. Which I was a little stunned by, because this book I definitely have a lot of opinions on, but he definitely has much stronger opinions on. So we're going to have very, very different videos. We film our videos blindly and then we watch each other's afterwards, but we do discuss the books at length as we're reading them. So definitely give his video a view. I think what you're going to find what he has to say is very different from what I have to say. Especially in regards to like characters, tone, setting, etc. So let me read the inside flap for y'all so you know what we are getting into. St. Vincent's Orphanage for Boys, early 20th century in a remote valley in Pennsylvania. Here, under the watchful eyes of several priests, 32 boys work, learn, and worship. Peter Barlow, orphaned as a child by a gruesome murder, has made a new life here. As he approaches adulthood, he has friends, a future, a family. Then late one stormy night, a group of men arrive at their door, one of whom is badly wounded, occult symbols carved into his flesh. His death releases an ancient evil that spreads like sickness, infecting St. Vincent's and the children within. Soon, boys begin acting differently, forming groups, taking sides. Others turn up dead. Now Peter and those dear to him must choose sides of their own, each of them knowing their lives and perhaps their eternal souls are at risk. Now, I recently briefly spoke about this novel in my July wrap-up, and I said that when I heard about this book, I had basically heard that it was marketed as Lord of the Flies meets The Exorcist. And as I said in my wrap-up, the first half of this book fully fits that. I think the very first half of this novel, more or less the first third, if I'm going to be completely honest, is fantastic. I think the character development, the setting, some of the more terrifying scenes that lead to the overall plot of the story are so well done. You are on the edge of your seat. You're never at ease when you're reading the first third of this book. I really, really loved it. The opening scenes where we kind of learn about Peter's origin story and how he ended up in the orphanage was so bleak. And I just loved the tone of bleakness that this novel set. I loved the isolated, snowy, wintry setting of this orphanage, far from town, in a valley, with little to no communication to the outside world during a snowstorm. I loved that. And I really, really loved the scene. I'm going to try really hard to make sure that this doesn't have any spoilers, but there are going to be a few scenes I definitely discuss in this review, just because I don't think I'm going to be able to do it justice if I don't. But I do love the scene, and it's alluded to in the back of the book, where the sheriff arrives with this possessed man. I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. And they perform the first exorcism in this novel. That kind of becomes the catalyst to everything that's happening. And I found that scene so well done. I found it so horrific. I found it so disturbing. I could see all of the visuals. The descriptions were just perfect. Everything done by oil lamp. I thought that scene was scary. And I loved the juxtaposition of us as the reader being able to see everything from like the priest perspective, and then the children only being able to hear what was going on. Brilliant. I thought that was so well done, and as a kid, it's so scary and confusing and strange. And I loved this concept that these orphans have all been kind of brainwashed to blindly follow these priests no matter what, no matter how horrible they are to them, and they are horrible. And I really thought this book was going to be a commentary on kind of the hypocrisy of certain higher-ups in the Catholic Church. I think that's something that, as we know in today's world, has been a problem going on. But the priests were so either cruel or spineless that they definitely should not have been role models, and yet seeing Peter kind of wanting to join the priesthood and being loyal to this priest and seeing how, like, there are all of these injustices, but, like, the way him and, what was that priest's name? I'm just so not going to remember. They were all Father something. Father Andrew, right? Yeah, I think it was Father Andrew. Seeing how Peter just looks up to Father Andrew as this, like, great figure and role model, and yet Andrew cannot stand up for the boys at all. And in his, like, perfect world, it's kind of this coward's way out of, like, oh, well, eventually, like, the more, like, evil priests or the more harsh priests will, like, die and he'll take over. Like, he can't ever stand up for them out of his own fear and spinelessness. And I was really hoping this book was going to be a huge critique on, like, blind faith, and it wasn't. And that was really upsetting to me because it really set up a platform for Fracassi to make a really good statement in that first half, and then that just never came, and instead the end of the novel I found to just be the complete opposite of what I wanted. The other thing I thought that was interesting with this novel is I really loved this idea of the Lord of the Flies concept. That's how the book is marketed. As you can see from the back flap of the book, like, something's going to happen and these kids are going to just unleash chaos upon everybody else in the orphanage. And as the book kind of sets up, there is, like, demonic possession that forces some of these children to act out in these horrific ways. I'm trying really hard to speak without, like, giving anything away. But what I found to be a huge flaw with this novel is I was really hoping it was going to be, like, one character is possessed and is able to, like, convince all of the other boys to act out of their own free will, and that is not the case. All of the sin and all of the blame and all of the negative actions have a scapegoat of a demon, and I think that is just unrealistic and nowhere near as scary as had these boys who were acted out of their own free will. And again, I felt like Philip Fracassi had the ability to write that narrative. The way the storyline is written, the way that all of these boys are kind of oppressed and treated so badly by the priests, why wouldn't they rise up against them if given the opportunity? And I just felt like this whole novel was a huge missed opportunity for a storyline that could have been way more compelling, way more scary, and way more set in reality. And as the book kind of went on, we do continue to have a lot of really depraved imagery. There are a lot of characters' deaths that I thought were very horrific and very scary and very well done. Like, they added to the horror of this novel, the atmosphere and the isolation, and the setting of this kind of old 1800s stone orphanage really was so vivid in my mind. And the way Fracassi wrote, it was just so intriguing to read about, and you could really just see everything and all of the religious imagery that was obviously very much right in front of you, but also the more subtle hints to other like religious iconography. I thought it was so well done, and I just kept hoping the novel was going to go in a different direction, and it didn't. And then I found there to be very few likable characters. I did actually like Bartholomew and Simon. I thought they were very interesting characters at first, and then their story arc kind of becomes this sort of like one note, where again, I feel like if free will was at play, they could have had more interesting story arcs, versus somebody like Peter, who I think just was this perfect unflawed character, and to be like the main character that we follow was kind of a drag. And the book is told through both third-person perspective and then first-person perspective, but just with Peter. And I kind of hated that because even being within Peter's mind, he still is just this perfect character. And a lot of his peers hated him for that, and even I found him annoying for that. And I think his storyline is just so, like, Clark Kent, Superman, and boring. Like, it just felt boring, and the conclusion at the end with the path that he chooses and the things that he does almost felt like Catholic Christian propaganda, and I don't understand why it went in that direction. I don't think it needed to. It took the elements of fear that Fracassi had placed in this novel and just completely abolished them. And I did love the little, like, love story that they wrote for Peter. I thought it was very cute, and I really appreciated that we didn't see a lot of it, because I didn't want that story to take away from what was happening in the overall story. And I really don't like when authors go on, like, these weird side tangents just to make, like, one minor point. I think Fracassi did a really good job of balancing the point he was trying to make with that love story without boring the reader to tears, because it's a horror novel. I don't want to read a romance. And I think he did a very good job with that. I really appreciated the balance and the purpose that that storyline served. It felt to be just the right amount. And then, again, fast, quick chapters that would then take me back to the action, which, again, I really appreciated. There's so many biblical names in this book. So many characters with B names, and then you have, like, David, Peter, Andrew. But I think one of the things that really did bother me, though, is there were just so many characters, and a lot of characters had similar names. There were so many B names. So it started to become a little difficult to figure out who was who. Like, apart from maybe Byron, Basil, Bartholomew, Simon, David, and Peter, every other character kind of faded into just one character. Like, it was really hard for me to figure out who was who. And in very Lord of the Flies, and I imagine this was like a slight, like, homage to Lord of the Flies, there are twins, and a character named Simon, so that made it even more confusing. But I don't know, it was a lot of characters. There were also a lot of priests, and even, like, our, like, the designated, like, bad guy adults also felt just, like, kind of, like, cliche and uninteresting, and just kind of felt like the villain mold. But in the end, it ended up, like, not being the villains, and I really wanted them to be because they were clearly supposed to be. I don't know. Maybe I'm rambling with this stuff. But yeah, and then there were a couple moments, and I know me and Blackacre spoke about this at length, where there was just, like, plot holes. Like, there's one scene where there's, like, a fire and a group are trapped, and it seems like there's no way out, and then all of a sudden, magically, there's a way out. And then again, it seems like there's no way out, and then all of a sudden, magically and completely unexplained, there's just a way out. And then again, it seems like there's no way out, and then magically, slightly explained, there's a way out. And all of that took place over the course of, like, 25 pages, and it was just boggling my mind that was happening, because it was like, oh my god, and they realized there was no way out. But then suddenly, they were out. And I was like, what? How did this happen? How did this happen? And I just read Briardark too, and they had one scene that did that as well. But this one, it was just like back to back to back to back. And then you get to the very end, and it's like, did any of it matter? Did any of it matter? And I guess there's, like, this weird undertone where, like, Fracassi might be saying, like, if you devote yourself to the church, you really will give up, like, your whole personal life. That seems like a very negative thing, but then there's also this, like, heroic aspect of, like, devoting yourself to the church is the correct answer. And I was just like, but why? Because we just spent, like, 200 pages seeing how members of this church are kind of awful people and not that powerful. So, I don't know. I gave this a 4 stars, and the more I think about it, the more I feel like this might be a 3-star read. And the reason I gave it 4 stars is because, again, the imagery, the setting, the actual, like, sheer terror that the first half of this book created was really well done. And I love Fracassi's prose, and I read this book really, really quickly because I wanted to know what happened. I really wanted to know what happened. And then I was really let down by the ending and the overall message, and that's kind of overshadowed the rest of the novel for me. So I feel like I did give it a very low 4 stars. I think I liked it more than Gothic. I think the first half of Gothic and the first half of Boys in the Valley are both very, very strong, and then they both kind of nosedive into completely different directions, but they're both not great endings. And then obviously you have A Child Alone with Strangers, which was my first introduction to Fracassi, and I loved that novel. Had a few minor flaws, and that got a 4-star rating from me. But if I compare them all together, A Child Alone with Strangers is just leagues better than Gothic and Boys in the Valley. But this was a 4-star because, again, I didn't want to put the book down, and I think that says something about the writing, even if I did not like the conclusion. And I feel like there were so many good ideas there, and I definitely wanted to put in perspective that, like, this is a novel Fracassi wrote probably 3 years ago. And so comparing it to some of the stuff that he wrote today on the same level when he's now had 3 more years of writing experience is a little trickier. So I would say that Fracassi's writing is definitely improving, especially with A Child Alone with Strangers, and I understand why this was a breakout book for him, but I did not love it, and I really wanted to, and that, like, bums me out so much. But again, I really, really loved the first half, and I really, really loved the imagery, the setting, the character development was interesting because you kind of understood why certain kids were more susceptible than others, but I felt the character development really stopped after the first half. So I don't know, I enjoyed reading it, I was creeped out by it, but the ending really overshadows it in a negative light. And now that I'm sitting here, it's like really hard to talk about like some of the things that I loved because I felt like a lot of the ending just negated that. I don't know. Somebody wrote recently, I think on my last video, that I should definitely check out more of Fracassi's short stories. I do own one of his collections, so I think I'm going to do that because, again, like the first half of his novels are always very, very strong. And then I just feel like he gets lost and takes like an extreme position on something and like one tracks through it and kind of can lose sight of what he was initially setting that novel up for. So I don't know. I will absolutely continue to read Philip Fracassi. I'm very intrigued, and again, I really like his writing style, I like his tone, I like his voice. I just don't necessarily know if I love his plots and his overall messages at the end of the day. And this has a very, very hopeful tone at the end of it versus Gothic, which is just such a nihilistic conclusion that I was actually stunned that these were both the same author and like written so close to one another, because I just expected the ending of this to be along the lines of that kind of dark and awful ending. Not necessarily that Gothic's ending was awful, but like the actual conclusion for the characters was a pretty awful conclusion for them. Like they did not luck out there. But then this one just felt so much more hopeful and like positive and like, again, religious propaganda. And not that I have anything against like Catholicism and Christianity and stuff, and I just wasn't expecting that conclusion here. And again, I was raised Catholic, so demons and possession horror definitely scare me because I grew up believing in that. But I just found this one to just be a little, I don't know, it just missed the mark for me on so many levels at the end. But again, the imagery is so strong, so creepy, loved the setting. I really did love the first half, so take that as you will. Anyways, that is all that I have for you guys today. As always, I post every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays. Definitely check out Black Acre's channel. I know he's gonna have probably harsher views on this novel than I do, but I'm sure it's gonna be extremely insightful as he always is, and he's definitely gonna touch on a lot of things that I probably missed. And yeah, if you enjoy these videos, please like and subscribe to both my channel as well as Black Acre Does. And I will catch you all on the next one. Mwah!